Little Horse and Big Conversation. Welcome to Little Horse and Big Conversation, where we give them their say, let the horse guide the way. Here at Little Horse and Big Conversation, we have the choice, so let's give them a voice. Here at Little Horse and Big Conversation, Little Horse and Big Conversation.
So, hello and welcome to this next episode of the Little Horse Big Conversation podcast. I am here with your co-host Ross Cooper and myself, Amy Mitchell. Ross, would you like to introduce today's topic?
I would like to introduce today's topic, and we might have some dogs joining us with a holler and a woof throughout, so we do apologise in advance for any interruption of the four-legged kind. So I think we are both very excited about today's topic, which is going to be focused on management and environment, which I think Amy will agree we both feel quite passionately about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something that for whole horse physical and emotional health is quite often overlooked. But I think if you can get it right, then it can be an absolute game changer. So yeah, it's something that I feel really strongly about for sure.
There was a quote which I think many people will be aware of by Alexander Den Heijer, if I've pronounced that right. Apologise to Alexander if I have not. But his quote is, "When a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower," which I think is a great opening quote for how this conversation is going to go.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, that's kind of a perfect representation.
so management and environment are very closely interlinked. So what we create for our horses has a massive impact on their ability to thrive.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And I think it's important to put it into the context of the horse's innate needs and behaviors. Um, and I think by looking at what they need as a species, and the things that are physically and emotionally important to them, that should really give us a bit of a blueprint for what we should be aiming for in terms of the environment that we provide. So they are herd animals. They're designed to live in groups, and as part of that, they form strong bonds. They form friendships, and they'll kind of strengthen those bonds and friendships by things like grooming, and being able to stand together as a group while some of them are sleeping and watching over each other, and having communal rolling areas, and all these sorts of things that involve horses being together, and that they are prey animals, so the safety in numbers aspects, and I think we overlook those sorts of things at our peril. But also, horses spend so much of their time moving. Movement is so key to the way that their body functions. Yes, it has an important part, obviously, for fitness, but just looking at the way that the horse's respiratory system works, the way that their gut health works, the circulatory system, everything is predicated around them being an animal that moves and moves a lot. Healthy feet, that's all around the feet moving a lot. That's my area of expertise, obviously. But movement is such an important factor, and free movement, not just being brought out of a stable and chucked around on a lunge line for half an hour. It needs to be that real free movement. So there's so many aspects to it, and I think if we can kind of step back and look and think, who is the horse as a species? What does he need? And then how do we replicate that as well as we possibly can, within the confines of domesticity? It pushes us onto a better track. No pun intended.
But we'll hit that topic a little bit later
Yeah,
on.
yeah, yeah.
So with that knowledge of horses' innate needs, how they naturally function, how they naturally behave within a natural horse and herd environment. By contrast, what do we feel? What do we feel is going wrong in domestication? Because I'll be honest, and possibly quite a strong statement, I feel that domestic husbandry is creating a massive welfare issue.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all. I I think there's a huge number of facets to it. I
Yes.
don't think there's a simple answer. I think some of the kind of fundamental structural things are that a lot of our ground isn't really appropriate to having lots of horses on it. So a lot of yards, for horses that are kept on yards, they are overstocked. And so in order to be able to manage the grazing, the horses get kept off the land a lot more than is appropriate for the horse. And again, that comes back to a point that we've made previously. Are people in the equine industry actually charging enough for their services? Because I think livery yards could do much better by horses if they were charging more. Sorry to say this to all the horse owners out there. Uh, and were then able to invest that money in providing, less horses on land and better services. So I think that's a part of it. But then I think as humans, and this is going down a bit of a psychological rabbit hole, so apologies for this in advance.
Necessary one though.
But I think it's we as a species are so disconnected from our own innate needs. The world that we live in is so disconnected from nature and from health, and our own social structures are so disparate now, and in the sense that we're a lot of things are done through social media rather than face-to-face contact, and the food that we eat is marketed as at us, and it's all about companies making money from selling us inappropriate food. And I think we become so used to seeing that in our own species that it's then if you see that as normal for yourself, I think it then becomes very difficult to look at another animal in your care, whether it be a horse or a dog, and to be able to see through the marketing and see through the everything that we're faced with on a daily basis, to think who is this animal at its core and what do they actually need. When if we can't do it for ourselves, I think it's kind of hard to see the wood for the trees with trying to do it for another species. I think for me that's a big part of the problem.
No, I agree. Because do you feel on some level that how an individual may look at managing their horse, management or environment wise, do you think that is or can potentially be reflective of that individual in terms of their awareness and connection to self?
I think in certain circumstances that is certainly the case. And let's look at the power of marketing. I mean, it is such a powerful thing, and we are constantly marketed it at all the time. So, when you're told that your horse needs to have some particular brand of food, and that the latest fabric technology in terms of rugs, and that you're almost kind of made to feel that you're not a good owner unless you're doing all of these things. It's not surprising. And I think we can all easily enough get caught up in these things because we do in every other aspect of life. But for the horse, I think a lot of times what they really need is for things to be stripped back.
Less is always more.
Yeah, yeah,
And I think in contrast to that, I mean, looking at domestication and the more standard ways that horses are managed.
mm,
So we have limited turnout. I mean, it's not it's increasingly the norm with changes in the environment, how seasons have got wetter, how, as you've already said, the land is not substantial for the amount of stock kept within a premises.
yeah,
So, very understandably, owners and managers are wanting to look after the land, which comes at the detriment of horses that quite often don't see grass or daylight for the best part of 6 months of the year.
yeah.
Now, with seasonal interchange, how it has been over the past 4 or 5 years, I mean, I think this winter just gone, we escaped quite lightly in comparison to the previous 2 years. But the year before was so wet that I was aware of some horses that hadn't actually been out for 8 months. They'd
Wow.
maybe spent half an hour on a horse walker
Mm,
or turned out in the school while being mucked out. But that is 23 and a half hours a day for a horse to be inside a box in confinement. Now, I know everyone will be able to relate to this because we all went through it. COVID pandemic.
yeah.
A lot of people responded to COVID very differently, and it wasn't a pleasant time for anyone. But there was quite a few people that did eventually start to get cabin fever. Now, we have got the cognitive function to be able to understand what's going on in the world.
Mm,
Horses are a lot more sensory. So while we're there going, okay, right, we've got to stay indoors for the next 6 weeks, we're being asked and told to do this for our own benefit. There's obviously varying opinions on that.
yeah, let's not go
Um,
down that one.
Yes, that's a rabbit warren, that one.
Yeah.
Um, but for horses, they're sensory and they are literally within a 12 by 12 stable for prolonged periods of time. That alongside individual turnout, horses not being able to on a daily basis exhibit afflictive behaviors. So those social behaviors that, you've already touched on, which are an innate need of a horse. They can't. How many horses can't actually touch another horse?
Yeah. And
That
it's
is a
so
basic
important.
social need.
Yeah. I mean my horses live in a herd. And it fluctuates slightly depending on, but we usually have between 10 and 11 horses. Um, and I take a lot of pleasure in watching the different interactions and the relationships and the bonds and seeing who wants to groom with who and how those things change, and you can see the difference that it makes to those horses. Um, I think it's and I think it's often brought up in these kind of conversations. People say let's make a comparison between what happens with horses and what happens with zoo animals. Now, the whole zoo thing is a different conversation, but there is a lot of effort generally put into making sure that the enclosure for the zoo animal is appropriate, and that if they're herd animals, that they're kept in a herd, that that things are set up to be as appropriate for them as is possible within the confines of the zoo. But I don't think we always do that with our horses.
No. And can I just reference the Animal Welfare Act on
Oh,
this
please do.
one? It's something that, I think we could do a whole podcast on this subject in itself. So the Animal Welfare Act comprises 5 needs.
Yeah,
Okay. That is the need for a suitable environment, the need for a suitable diet, the need to exhibit normal behavior, freedom and protection from pain, suffering, injury, and the need to be housed with, express normal behavior, fear from distress, social needs need to be met. Now, within those five needs, how many do we actually tick for horses, really?
Yeah, I know. A lot of the time it's
It's
yeah,
one or two, if that.
yeah,
So why is that the case, and why do horses very often get overlooked in that respect? And I find it quite interesting because if we go a little bit deeper into this, saying that a horse is on four legs, they're eating and they're moving around, I don't think that's good enough. And welfare organizations, I personally do feel it would be really beneficial to horse owners everywhere if a little bit more of a push and awareness was brought to the forefront of actually these are five needs which aren't being met. Let's not overlook them. What can we do? And
yeah,
obviously, this is something that we're touching on in today's chat because horses do get overlooked, and
yeah.
it just becomes a socially conditioned norm of how we treat them or keep them.
And I wonder if there's also an element of maybe if you went back 30 years, um, I don't know, there's part of me that thinks maybe we've regressed. Or maybe I just have this like rosy view of horses in my childhood. But,
Well, I
you
have.
know, I think when we had less facilities, um, not everybody had access to an all-weather arena. Not everybody had floodlighting. Not everybody had access to transport. I think probably horses were turfed out for several months of the year and given time off. Whereas because we now have access to all these kind of lovely facilities, there's more of an expectation that the horse will be available 12 months of the year for human stuff. And whether that also adds to some of this.
Do you feel on a level that if a owner individual is looking for somewhere to board their horse, they would be prioritizing facilities over needs?
Oh, potentially. I mean, that feels like a
And I
sweeping
say, and I'm
statement.
not saying, I just want to clarify that I'm definitely not saying that with any judgment because I appreciate that this whole discussion and how we look after and manage horses is a tricky one to balance because yes, there is, there's goals and there's things that we want to achieve with our own horses. At the same time as trying to balance out what our horses need. So yes, it's definitely not a bad thing to be seeking somewhere to keep your horse with facilities, but at the same time, how is the rest of that environment? Because you might spend an hour in the arena with your horse a day. What's happening for the other 23 hours? So where is the balance point? And I think that's overall what we need to be considering and looking at. What are we doing within the rest of your horse's day, week, month, year, life? What are we doing to balance out to meet their needs? Because effectively, you doing a prelim dressage test around the arena, that's great, that's fantastic, as long as you're doing it appropriately. But that's your horse meeting your needs.
Yeah, for sure.
We
Um,
need to show the same consideration by meeting theirs, as you've said, as a horse.
yeah. And I think it's probably worth kind of thinking through a little bit why why it matters. Um, this movement I think is massively under thought through, and the whole horse's health, as say, is predicated around free movement, the physical well-being, but also the emotional well-being. You know, they're designed to be moving, they're designed to be in herds, and they're designed to be grazing and also browsing a lot of the hours of the day. So the digestive system is based around that. The digestive system is based around trickle feeding. And once we start messing around with these things, the horse's body can't evolve fast enough to keep up with our changing domestic requirements. So the horse's body and the horse's brain is still much the same as it was pre-domestication. The consequences have to be ill health, dysregulation. And it's the same for us. You know, we fill ourselves with crap and we don't move enough. The outcome is ill health. And there is a kind of an epidemic of insulin resistance and metabolic disorders in horses, which at their heart, you know, are fundamentally linked to inappropriate lifestyles and inappropriate feeding and lack of movement, and you know, native ponies eating far too much rich grass that they're not designed to cope with. And you know, there's laminitis. Well, and again, I don't know whether it's kind of a rosy memory from childhood, but I don't remember there being so much laminitis around when I was a kid. You know, and the ponies that. But then the ponies were turned out in a big field as a big herd, and they'd all run around together, and it was very different. And there wasn't 150 different sorts of rugs as soon as you go into a tack store, all with lovely different cool prints on them and stuff. And you know, you have those big horrible heavy green New Zealand rugs and that would get rained on, and then you'd have to hang them up, and they'd take about a week to dry out properly. And no rugs didn't come with full necks on, and you know, horses kind of slummed it as horses, but they survived. And I think I feel like they were healthier before we started cosseting them too much.
Survived or thrived?
Well, I mean, you know, I'm, you know, acting like the middle-aged person, looking back like everything was rosy. But I think things are better when we're not trying to interfere too much. And you know, that these chronic illnesses that we see are, as a result, a lot of the time, of environmental problems. And I feel I can speak to this with a degree of experience because I see clients' horses and see them in particular situations. And I'm going to name drop a client of mine here. So sorry, Tina and Tez, I'm going to name drop you guys now. But, you know, they were keeping their two horses in a fairly, you know, it was a nice yard, a really good yard, but it was quite a traditional setup. And over the winter, because the ground was quite clayish, they would quite often not have as much turnout. And their big Shire, like Clydie Cross horse, he quite arthritic in his hocks, and he was a nightmare to trim, really, really hard to trim, not out of any sense of malice, but because he just couldn't physically do it and it was uncomfortable. So, you know, he, being a very big fella, felt that he therefore just wouldn't engage with it. And their other little fella, permanently teetering on the verge of laminitis, constant systemic inflammation, you know, constant thrushy feet. Despite best efforts and despite him having the right feeds and the right supplements and so on, they have since been in the fortunate position to be able to buy a piece of land, which they've set up as a little track system. And so those two horses now live out full time. And the change in them over the months since they've been living this more appropriate lifestyle has been quite astonishing. You know, they've both lost weight. They've both got fitter. The big fella, I can now trim all four of his feet without him being really uncomfortable and without him being really snatchy. The little one no longer has constant low level pulses and a constant crest. That movement and that change in diet and that being able to constantly be with with friends and just it creates health And it's not just, I'm not just cherry picking those two horses. I've had numerous horses come onto my track system that have come overweight and suffering with inflammation and again teetering on the verge of laminitis or with anxiety problems, and you put them out into a settled herd and you give them appropriate feed and you get them moving and give them time. It's crazy how it changes, and yet like it's simple.
Yeah. And I know our mind is both going to the same horse when we're talking
Yes.
about anxiety, who has arrived at your
Yes.
place. And yeah, shall we name drop Prince?
Yeah, we should do.
Got to because we love him.
Yeah.
But I mean, this is the thing as well. I mean, when I think I first must have met Prince a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Um, Thank you, Amy, for the recommendation to him. Um, but I mean, Prince was so dysregulated when I first met him. And, the yard that he was at, again, more in terms of traditional management, but as you can get with quite a few yards, there is a lot of inconsistencies and a lot of changes in
Yeah.
terms of horses coming and going. And I think that's another important thing to consider as well, both from a management and welfare perspective, is the stability of horse herds, because horses that are in an established structure are going to feel safer, and they're going to have a little bit more know-how about where everything is and where everything and how everything operates. And one of the things that I absolutely love to see is, because I see this so many times when I'm called out to see, a remedial issue or a behavior which is not overly desirable, is that I love to come out and go, okay, I think there is a few management changes that we can make here. Let's try, let's maybe try changing the feed, or let's changing the turnout routine. And the behavior goes and dampens down very, very quickly
Mm,
because it's a result of that environment. I've worked with a horse recently where we're making really good steps towards feeling just a little bit happier, but happier within his stable environment. But he's hesitant to go in the stable after being turned out for just 2 hours in a 24-hour period. So it's one of
mm,
those where I'm like, okay, let's create incentives to go into the stable, which is maybe a little bit more enriching, which is going to help him with his stress levels, because it's a very busy yard. And I personally don't feel he's thriving there. So I
mm,
think there are lots of different things that factor into this. But yeah, one of the best things is really changing and tweaking the environment, which allows the horse to come from, just an internal baseline neutral of going, okay, this is me, because your horse's behavior is not your horse. So often it's caused by stress, which, as we know, stress results in stress comes from a dysregulated nervous system. Now, nervous systems with horses in domestication, they're not designed to function, well, they can't function appropriately in domestication. In the wild, you know, lion sees zebra runs away. Lion catches zebra, unfortunate for zebra, but in but in other, in other situations, zebra escapes. Nervous system has upregulated for that situation, and then soon
mm.
as the threat or even the perceived threat, because nervous systems work on perceived threat, not just a direct actualized threat.
Yeah.
It's all about perception. Then the nervous system will re-regulate. And you have that natural flow state, but with horses, they get stuck. They're stuck in sympathetic upregulation, which creates chronic stress. And for any person, we know how chronic stress can affect us, the effect that it has on our mental well-being, our physical well-being, our guts, our ability to do life without burning out. I mean, we spoke about some of that in the previous episode. But, your overactivation of your sympathetic branch is going to cause it's going to cause an overproduction of cortisol, which is one of your main stress hormones. And cortisol, don't get me wrong, it's naturally beneficial, otherwise we wouldn't have it in our bodies. But, long term, it creates problems. It compromises the immune system, it leads to inflammation in the body. And, Amy, you've already touched on inflammation, metabolically, within the hooves. Just, it's not just going to have a singular effect. It's inflammation in one area and not in another.
Yeah, I mean,
But
it massively simplifying the role of cortisol.
we could go down a whole podcast route just talking about heat,
Yeah, but I mean, just to really
cortisol, and
simplify, essentially, when you go into a fight or flight state, adrenaline hits first, and that's the thing that makes you do your initial like panic run reaction, and then cortisol comes through pretty quickly afterwards. And cortisol basically helps your body to focus just purely on the act of fleeing and saving yourself. So it will focus in on those really essential systems, and then your other systems that are in that moment, like your immune system, like sex drive, all those kind of peripheral systems become far less effective, because in the moment of you trying to escape from the lion, those things don't matter to you. And then, as you say, in the wild animal, they're able to come back down from that. But if you're in a state of constant low level stress and anxiety, that cortisol is constantly circulating. So all those peripheral systems that are so important to our overall health and well-being are constantly being kind of dampened down. I mean, that's massively oversimplifying it. So please, nobody who's a scientist come back and tick me off with that. That's it's intended to be an but that's essentially it. So chronic stress, it feels horrible being in a constant state of anxiety, but it's also really bad for health and well-being.
yeah, and it only, your cortisol levels will only start to subside with all the other interplay going on within the body when that perceived threat
Yeah, yeah,
goes. But again, like we mentioned, it's perception. And if you've got a horse that has, let's say, for example, you're leading a horse in from the field, they, may spook at a few things in the way in from the field, and then they're put in a box.
mm,
So anyone that's ever experienced a state of anxiety will know that if you go up into anxiety, the best thing for anxiety is movement.
mm-hmm,
So you're stuck and you're effectively compressed. So if that happens with repetition, like it does with so many horses, and like you say,
yeah,
Amy, we are simplifying the interplay with how the nervous system works just because we don't feel we need to go into that much depth today. But your horse is going to get stuck, and that is going to rewire your horse's brain function. It's going to rewire your horse's nervous system and just create this consistent level of dysregulation. And going on from that, the development of stereotypies in horses. You
yeah,
know,
absolutely.
your box walking, your weaving. So,
Yeah,
traditionally, these have always been described as repetitive behaviors that don't actually serve any function. I don't like calling them stereotypies or stereotypes. I prefer to call them coping mechanisms
mm,
because they are effectively your horse trying to cope with an environment, with a situation that their only outlet is, just from my observation of what they what they express is a sort of form of what they would naturally express.
yeah, 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 absolutely.
And it's I think sometimes we like to cause our own problems
Of course.
in that respect. We see
I think
behavior,
we
it's the
try and
whole.
overthink and over-engineer and that's the nature I think of being human, isn't it? Like we're always trying to improve on things and sometimes actually the best way to improve things is just to kind of simplify them.
And
Like
I think that's it. And I've actually I've had this conversation quite a lot recently where we've spoken about different, different training modalities and different approaches and all things horse related that actually can work better simplified.
yeah.
But that's our human brain overcomplicating things. I mean, when it comes to the behavioral side, I think simple changes work the most effectively. It doesn't need to be about doing, but they're always just, it goes back to that social conditioning and that disconnect I think you mentioned earlier, Amy, in the sense that we can't recognize it. If we're upregulated, we're dysregulated, we are just going to be, the horse is going to be vibing off us. We know how that works. And
Yeah.
we're also vibing off the horse, and we can't see past that fog and that mist that we've got unless we've actually taken a step out of that box and we've got the awareness to actually see the behavior in front of us and where that's coming from to make changes to how we can help.
Yeah, so I think I would imagine that there will be people listening to this that are thinking, well, that's fine, because it's all very well for you to be saying that the answer to all this is to let all your horses live out 24/7 on a track system and so on. And I think, I have a track system. That's how I keep my horses, but my land is sandy. The soil drains well. Um, I've been very lucky to have my own land. I appreciate that although I think it's a lovely way to keep horses, I also appreciate it doesn't work for every horse. Um, and I think we have to bring a degree of realism to where we are at here and now in terms of the general facilities that are available to owners. So I know that there's always more and more of these kind of places popping up, and that's great. I think it's also worth mentioning the equiculture system. So people have probably come across Jane Myers, whose system this is, but it's another sort of alternative grazing system that allows you to kind of rotate the land and give the horses the movement and give them a like a an area to hang out and to behave more naturally, but without it completely trashing your land. So there are different methodologies and her stuff is definitely worth looking up because she gives some quite good ideas about how you can take more traditional setups and kind of turn them into a more appropriate area. But I think we also, as a equine community, need to be looking at a longer term strategy for where we go with these things. And it would be great if all livery yards had some sort of facilities for horses to have all year round turnout. And looking at things like crew yards, and more all weather facilities. And it's not going to be perfect, but I think those are the sorts of things it would be great to see places investing in, using some imagination to create more horse centric environments. But I hate to say, I also feel there needs to be a greater understanding amongst the liverying public that these things come at a price, and that it needs to be a supply and demand thing. I think the more customers are demanding these sorts of facilities, the more likely owners are going to be to provide them. But this is also not a shoestring budget kind of thing. So I think if people want to keep horses well, they also have to appreciate that unless you're lucky and you've got a really nice area of land that is low, sort of up on the moors or the fell sides and so on, where it's good natural environment. In other parts of the UK where those kind of easy turnout in group environments are not as simple to provide, that in order to create these kind of situations, it does cost money.
Mm.
And yard owners need to be incentivized to think, well, actually, if I create this, the demand is there and people will want it. Because otherwise, why would they do it? Unless it's people like, like me who are a bit obsessive of like, well, this is how I want to keep my horses, and if I'll take a few liveries alongside, but it was more my kind of, this is what I want for my own horses. Um, so I think that's like a long-term thing. Um,
Because would you say that, for a lot of yard owners or landowners, that there are benefits from stepping outside of conventional management because it would make better use of the land in certain situations, it create more space, improve welfare standards, but also it'd be better for the environment. I mean, the one thing that I've noticed and what I love about your setup is that you've got a small track system, but the
mm,
environment that that's created, the amount of wildlife which is within your acreage.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've only got, oh, it's just under 4 acres. But I've reseeded a lot of the middle areas with sort of wildflowers and herbal seeds, which gives a huge amount of diversity. So then I love that in the summer you get all the flowers, but you also then get the insects and you get butterflies and birds. It brings nature in and it provides a really nice environment, but it's also, I think, so much better for the soil. So, driving down the A1, for example, if I'm heading south or something, and you're looking around at what you're seeing, and you see so many fields that are full of, sort of really overgrazed um, areas that have got horses on. I think if more of us created these more imaginative, better environments for horses, it is so much better for wildlife too. And think what we could do from an ecology perspective, just as a sideline of doing things better for horses. Again, it's something else that I feel kind of quite passionate about. Um, there's constant talk about soil erosion and poor quality soils. And if you're not overgrazing your land and you're able to use one of these kind of rotational type approaches and to be able to get really good root systems and the bacteria back into the soils and the dung beetles, and it makes such a difference to our whole environment, which in turn is then so much better for the horse. So you know it's a win-win. It really is.
I was just pausing because I
Yeah.
thought you had some more to go there.
No, I mean, yeah, I mean, I could go on about that topic for quite a while. But I think it's something that's really important. But I think we have to accept that although, as I say, I would love to see more and more places going down that kind of road because I think it would make a massive difference to our whole ecology generally and for conservation generally, and for horse health. I think there's also the considerations of, okay, if you are not somewhere where you're able to have those kinds, that whole big big ticket change. I think people shouldn't feel too crap about themselves. You have to just make the best of the situation that you're in, and that if there aren't any other options that are going to work for you, um, I would love to see that horses weren't being stabled and that all horses just had nice access to big open free barns that they could wander in and out of and so on. But that's not where we're at. And I think people don't have to feel terrible if they're somewhere that the sand is clay and that over winter they need to stable the horse at night because that's the only way to manage the land. I don't think I don't think that's what we're saying. I think long-term strategies would be great to have to kind of move away from those things, but being able to ensure that your horse does have turnout every day, and does have access to other horses and friends and does have access to free movement, and that they have the right kind of forage and enough of it, and that the training methods that we're using and that the handling methods that we're using are, not causing our horses stress, pain, and anxiety. I think we can look at all these. We talk about environment. Environment is not just those things that we're talking about, the external things. It is also what's the horse eating, what's the horse's gut health like. Are they in pain from the tack that they're using? Are they being fed the right food? What's their gut health? All these things are all part of environment. And if we are not in a position to make sweeping changes to that thing that immediately pops into your head as does the horse live out 24/7, if we can pick some of those other things and try and make sure that we're doing those as well as possible, it's a good start, and it will make changes.
But I think, you touched on it there. I don't want anyone to be listening to this conversation and go away feeling deflated because they can't keep their horses in an idyllic setting. Because, yes, most of us would want that for our horses, but it's not practical.
No.
It's not accessible for multiple reasons. From a person's perspective, it could be, finances. Finances are massive interplay. It could be, the limitations of the yards around you. It could be the area that you're in. So many different things do factor in on that. So if the one thing that people take away from this is things to take forward to help improve and consider, then I think we'll class that as a job well done. Because creating a species-specific environment, we need to be thinking outside the box with the limitations that we're presented with. I mean, you were saying, Amy, how you keep yours. That's fantastic, and that's what I think having the movement, and I'm not talking specifically track system setup because, as you've said, that doesn't work for all horses as we know. But I think what they have access to in terms of the horse's innate need, they've got it.
Hmm.
So, by contrast, Badger. So, Badger, we've had to have a yard move, and he's paddocked next to another horse, but he's on his own, which I don't particularly like that for him. I'm super aware of, he settled in quite nicely. It's a really lovely place, nice and quiet. But I would certainly prefer him to have more interaction with other horses because he's such a social little dude. So one thing that you can be really hot on, and I'm really hot on this anyway, is enrichment.
I mean, I was just going to say that the answer is everybody gets a mini Shetland.
If the local rescue centres have an influx of inquiries now.
Ah, dear.
I do think that is a good shout, though.
Big up the mini Shetlands.
Oh, I can hear Munchkin's ego swelling as we speak.
Well,
That's
oh dear. But yeah, no, no. In all seriousness, you're absolutely right.
But I mean, enrichment means, you know, enrichment to create more of a mentally and physically stimulating environment. It improves the quality of life, and there's so many different ways that you can enrich a horse's life. It could be cognitive, it could be environmental, you could,
I mean, things like, I've got some really lovely big willow trees at the end of my garden, and now that the ground is dried out, my plan will be to go down there and take some sort of big old cuttings off there, and to bunch them up and to take them up for the horses, to be able to have, and so giving them like different things to eat that are going to be more interesting to investigate and to chew, and that will take longer, and because they'll if they're fairly thin twigs, I mean they'll eat the leaves, but they'll chew the whole twigs down. And that's really good for them. And again, that sort of thing provides interest, and yeah, just being able to kind of mix things up a bit, and even in a paddock, just being able to kind of move fencing around a little bit so that they've got to move around to get from one thing to another, and maybe putting a few poles out that they need to walk across to get from one end of the field to the other through a little corridor, and just adding in little bits of interest, and putting salt blocks out in different places and moving the feed stations around so that your horse isn't always eating in exactly the same place, and just little things can
Essentials is a good one as well. So
absolutely, yeah.
scent and forage boxes.
Yeah.
They're always really cool and can be done. And again, cost effective. You can get some really decent essential oils like lavender and peppermint, dilute them. You can put them in you can dip some on Hessian sacks. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
that's quite safe for them to mull around with. And we know that there's the interlink between essential oils and the benefits that they can bring to horses. So that's equally great. And your scent balls and boxes,
Yeah.
they're really cost effective. So, your latest Amazon delivery, for example, you can reuse that box and create something different. And, depending how often you order from Amazon, which quite a lot for a lot of people, um, you could do that a couple of times a week. Herb gardens are great ones as well. Scatter feeding.
Oh, and I tell you what, somebody mentioned to me the other day, which they'd picked up off a Facebook post that I thought was really cool, is like, like the plastic chopping boards that you get with like a hole for the handle,
Yeah.
reasonably flexible. It's like having those and kind of smearing things on them that the
Yeah,
horse
yeah.
can lick, and putting them in different places.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that was kind of a cool idea.
Yeah, you taste
Um,
it.
yeah, yeah, like Marmite, and just different things for the horse to kind of investigate. And I mean, obviously, you wouldn't want to be smearing something sweet on it in the summer and it turning into a massive wasp trap. But oh, and I'm going to give a shout out to my lovely friend Nia from Finer Forage, because she does these lovely herbal water buffets, which are awesome because you get like a box full of a whole different sorts of different herbs, that are in bags that you can basically make like a herbal tea in a big bucket of water for the horses, and put them out, and they can enjoy investigating different flavors. And not only is that lovely in terms of enrichment, but they're also like really healthy and good for them. So those are, yes. So do check out Nia's water buffets at Finer Forage. Um, but
Yeah, they are a good shout.
yeah,
Well, the thing is, you don't, with enrichment, and I'm just really wanting to touch on one here, is that if you've got horses which do seem to get on very well together, hand walk them out together. You
yeah,
know,
that's true.
gradual introduction. And, if you are at a yard where, the social structures and dynamics are quite fleeting, horses naturally, they vibe off each other, they co-regulate. If
Mm,
you can bring them together for that social interaction experience within maybe, a neutral turnout space, for
yeah,
example. If you're
yeah,
looking at, you've got two young horses which don't get to exhibit play or interact too much. Bring them together, obviously introduce them and make sure that everything's all good beforehand. But little play dates like that, walking out, hand walking, hand foraging. There is
yeah,
so many ways that you can offer enrichment to your horses that don't require any money or spending any money.
yeah. It's very
And
true.
the
Very
benefits
true.
are massive. I mean, enrichment, depending on the type of enrichment, it's really good as a nervous system down regulator. So you can even bring enrichment into your training sessions. They don't just have to be done within your horse's daily environment. But it's going to it wards off stress. It's going to ward off some of the stereotypes and coping mechanisms that we've already spoken about. Like you said, Amy, just the maneuvering of fences, that's going to encourage different muscles, and if you can and movement, and if you can do it over different terrain and different gradients, it's going to be good for hooves. It's going to be good for proprioception. So you can target. You're not just targeting your horse's mind, but you're going to be helping work with the horse's body as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the thing, isn't it? You know, using a bit of lateral thinking and some imagination, you can do some cool stuff.
Yeah,
Even if the whole situation isn't ideal and isn't what you'd want, I think you can kind of provide some other cool stuff.
yeah. And this goes for training as well.
Yeah.
Variety of training. You know, whether you do some ridden, whether you do some groundwork, whether you do some clicker training or obstacles, or just hang out with your horse and just be that, you know, that social presence next to them.
Yeah, I think that's all important, isn't it? All that relationship type stuff. It's yeah.
Yeah.
So I think
So,
we've kind of
well,
gone over again like a few tangents, a few
as
rabbit holes. Um, but it you know there's so much that you could discuss on all of these little aspects that we've looked at in a lot more detail. But it's so important, and a lot of it can be easy. I think we just overthink things, and I think sometimes the most profound changes come from simple tweaks and simple adjustments, and just respecting the horse as the animal that it is and trying to meet those needs. So yeah, I hope this has kind of given a bit of food for thought.
little changes on a daily basis.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Well, I think we have hit every single point.
Yes, that we had on our list. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I need to go and meet my innate needs now and and go and have some lunch.
I'm glad you finished off that sentence.
Oh dear.
Right. Well, thank you everyone again for tuning in, and we will be back with our next episode in 2 weeks' time.
Yep.
See you soon.
Over and out.
Little Horse and Big Conversation. Welcome to Little Horse and Big Conversation, where we give them their say, let the horse guide the way. Here at Little Horse and Big Conversation, we have the choice, so let's give them a voice. Here at Little Horse and Big Conversation, Little Horse and Big Conversation.